Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Welcome. We've got a fun hour to spend together. Today, I'm Chris Williams, and we are going to paint our little canvas this evening that is Be a Sunflower. You know, the world is full of roses, and there is a saying that says, in the world full of roses, be a sunflower. So that means kind of stand out and do your own thing and don't always follow the crowd. So tonight, instead of being a little wildflower here that we have in our canvas, we're going to stand out and be a great big sunflower. So let's go ahead and go overhead, and we'll go ahead and start our project right away, because we've got, as usual, we have a lot to cover in a very little bit of time period tonight. So let's just go ahead and get started. I already have my pattern transferred. Let me raise it up so that you can kind of see a little bit closer. I just transferred the basic pattern lines. I did not transfer any of the detail lines, like our little hash marks or the swirl or the little swirls in the petals. Those are what I consider detail lines. I didn't transfer my lines on my pot or the vein here within the leaf. Just the basic lines is what I have transferred on mine. If you're new to Michael's community classes, you may not have seen there was a free downloadable pattern that you could print out and then piece together to then transfer onto your canvas tonight. So I've got mine all transferred and ready to go. And let's just go ahead and start getting some paints out onto the palette. I'm using the FolkArt multi-surface formula of paints, and this is a paint formula that goes on a variety of surfaces with no additional mediums or any kind of special things required. We're just going to pull out, and the blue I just put out is Look at Me Blue. And then I'm also going to add a purple out onto our palette, and the supply list was also there on michaels.com. in the area where you did your book now and register, but this color is Violet Pansy that I'm putting on the palette. And I'm also going to get out a green, and that is our Thicket. So those will be our first three colors, and we're going to add one more to that, and that is going to be our golden color, and that is Yellow Ochre. So let me go ahead and refer back to all of the colors that I have out right now. That's Look at Me Blue, Violet Pansy, Thicket, and our gold here is Yellow Ochre. So let's go ahead and just start getting some color on our canvas. I am going to start with the blue, and I'm going to paint both the band and the body of our pot all solid with our Look at Me Blue. Right now, I'm just going to do a lot of just putting basic color on our canvas. I'm not going to do a lot of shading or highlighting yet at this time. So I'm just going to use my largest brush right now, which is a 3/4 inch flat brush. I'm loading up both sides of that brush with my Look at Me Blue color. Use the chisel edge of the brush to kind of help draw some lines if you need it, to kind of give you that straight edge of your flower pot. If you're painting along with me tonight, you're doing the same thing right now along with me. If you're just sitting back watching and relaxing, and plan to paint this at another point in time, as we said earlier in our announcements, this class is being recorded. So I think sometime tomorrow it will be uploaded to the Michaels channel on YouTube, and you'll be able to follow along with the recording. I know for some of you it's still early in the day. For some others it might be a little bit later in the day. And maybe you've worked hard today and you're tired and you don't want to paint along just now. So that's quite all right. We invite you just to kind of come and grab a comfortable little chair and maybe have a nice drink in your hand and just sit back, relax, and watch. Ask questions if you have any in the chat. Here at Plaid, I have a coworker here with me today, and that's Caitlin. Caitlin is going to be watching and helping to moderate. So Caitlin, if we have any questions, don't hesitate to interrupt me, because you know me, I'm just going to nonstop talk.
Okay.
And I'll do my best to answer the questions as Caitlin introduces any of them to us. This again is Look at Me Blue. It's just a medium value blue. So any medium value blue is what you can use if you don't have the Look at Me Blue. And if you don't, shame on you, because this is a gorgeous color just to have on hand in your painting arsenal. Okay, I've pretty much got my pot covered. Make sure that when you're working on a canvas that has a nice weave to it, that you make sure that paint goes in every single little crevice of the canvas. And I've got a nice coat of blue on my pot right now. So I'm going to go ahead and rinse that blue out of my brush, and let's go ahead and start working on the green leaves. That will be the next part that I will base in with some color. These are a little bit smaller in size than my pot, so I'm going to drop down from that 3/4 inch to a number 12, and this is the Thicket that we put out on our palette, and there's just a portion of a leaf showing here on the left side and pretty much the full leaf here on the right side. So let's just go ahead and get those leaves painted in with our green. Again, this is Thicket, and I switched down to a number 12 flat brush. I saw as you all were coming in a few moments ago into the Zoom meeting, I recognized several of our friends as members of our Let's Paint with Plaid community. So thank you all for joining me this evening. I hope you are painting along, whether it's tonight or possibly tomorrow, or maybe even over the upcoming weekend. Be sure and take a picture of your project and share it in the group Let's Paint with Plaid, because I love to be a cheerleader for everyone. Love to help you enjoy your journey of learning to paint and painting along with us. So be sure and take a picture and share it with us all. Okay, I've got my 2 leaves painted. And by the way, I do need to paint pretty fast as I go along tonight, because I want to make sure that we get everything covered in that hour that we have to spend together. So do your best to keep up. If for some reason you prefer painting at a much slower pace, and there's no problem with that at all, just know that you are welcome to paint at your own pace and take your own time tonight. The recording is also going to be here so that you can follow and finish up yours. If you are a little bit slower this evening, don't worry about it. I want you to have a good time and paint at your own pace. What I just did with my number 12 flat brush and Thicket was I painted the 2 leaves. And then you'll also notice that while I was talking, I also painted 2 flower stalks. That's our one here in the center for the sunflower, and our little wildflower that is off on the right-hand side of our painting. I'm going to clean the green out of my brush right now. And our next thing that we're going to base in and get color on, I'm just cleaning that green out really well and drying it off as best I can. I'm going to now put in the yellow petals of our sunflower. So I'm going to use the yellow ochre color, and I'm going to use that number 12 brush now that it's completely clean and free of my green paint. I'm loading both sides of that flat brush. And I'm not going to worry too much right now about the center. It's just the petals that I'm worried about. I'm not really worried, but I'm going to concern myself with and paint. And I'm just going to paint maybe a flat edge along that center line and then go out to this to the tip. I'm just basing in color right now, so I'm not worried about trying to do a specific brush stroke to fill in this shape. I'm just color book painting. You know, when you're a child and you're coloring in shapes and spaces, and that's what we're doing right now. We are just basing in some of these shapes and some of these spaces. We're not worrying about specific brush strokes. This is a very simple design. It has a lot of detail to it, which kind of makes it a little bit more fun and special. But this is something that, gosh, anyone of any skill level and any age can probably do. So if you have children at home, or maybe you have the grandkids nearby, or maybe you're an aunt or an uncle of some little ones, feel free to use this pattern with them on some time, because I think they would enjoy painting it as well. So right now, again, I'm using my number 12 flat brush. And I've loaded it with my yellow ochre. And I'm just kind of basing in the shape of our sunflower petals. So our pot was Look at Me Blue. The leaves were done with Thicket. And now the petals are our third color, which is the golden yellow, and that is yellow ochre. Caitlin, have we had any questions yet?
Nope.
Okay. I hope that's a good sign that maybe I'm repeating myself enough and that you all are understanding what you should be doing. Tonight, we're going to have fun with just some simple little steps. Sunflowers are so popular in general decorating, but they're so popular this time of year too, because I think that's when late summer, early fall is when a lot of sunflowers are in bloom. So why not be a sunflower? I'm working on my last sunflower petal. Okay. Ooh, sorry. I forgot to turn my phone off. My bad. Sorry about that. All right, I have my yellow ochre now complete. And then the last color that I have on my palette right now is our purple. And that was my second color I put on. And that purple is Violet Pansy, I believe. Let me just double check. Yes, Violet Pansy. And while we're at it, I'm going to add just a little bit more of two other colors. I'm going to add a little bit of our white. So that is our Wicker white. Or you could use titanium white. Go ahead and put a little bit of that on your palette. And then I'm going to add one more color, and that is our brown. And the brown I'm using tonight is Bark Brown. Just put a little bit of brown out. Okay. So now I'm going to continue using that number 12 flat brush, and I have cleaned that brush one more time in the brush basin of water that I have here off to the side. And I just want to blot it, make sure I've got it nice and dry. So with that Violet Pansy, I'm going to start basing in our areas of our two wildflowers. So when we look at the wildflower on the right-hand side, this one here, we have a total of 1, 2, 3 circles. So let me pull that up so you can see it closer. We have 1, 2, and 3 circles. It's this third circle, this largest circle, that's what's going to get painted the Violet Pansy. So again, use that number 12 flat brush. If you need to, for your comfort level, to scoot down and go a little bit smaller, that's okay. Only burnt umber. Yes, that would be fine. Burnt umber will work great. I didn't see who was asking that, but I think someone was asking if they could use burnt umber instead of bark brown. You just want a nice warm brown that leans more dark than leans light. The brown that we're going to use is towards a little bit in the leaves, but we're going to also use it in the center of our sunflower. So that's, think about brown inside a sunflower. That's what we want. And I am working now, like I said, my number 12 flat brush. I'm working on the largest circle here of our little wildflower. And because this is not a specific flower, this is just simply a little drawn out wildflower. If you can't get those circles exact, listen, that makes the wildflower even more interesting. So don't worry about trying to get perfection on these. So there's my little purple on that one. And then the wildflower that's on the left-hand side, the center of that full center is all going to be your dark purple, which is our Violet Pansy. So you're going to paint the circle center of the wildflower over here. Same brush, same color, Violet Pansy. And I'm going to continue on just using long, smooth strokes and do my best to kind of make a circle shape for this flower center. We have a little swirl curlicue that we're going to paint on top of this. So again, if you don't have a full complete circle, don't worry. I don't want anyone fussing over this particular painting. This is something that's very, very simply done and easy done. All right, now I'm going to clean. Now I tell you what, I'm not going to wash the brush, but I do want to squeeze out that dark, dark purple. So now what we want to do, the next circle size inside here is a lighter purple. And as you can see here, every other petal on the flower that's on the left side is also like a medium value lavender. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our violet pansy plus a little bit of our white, and we're just going to brush mix. I'm not going to take time to do a lot of palette knife mixing tonight. Tonight, we're going to keep it very, very simple, and we're just going to brush mix. And I'm going to drop down to a smaller brush. You can, this was a number 12 that I was using. You could use a number 10 or number 8. You can even go down to a 6 if that works for you. I'm going to take some white over here off to the side. And then I'm going to take some of that violet pansy and just brush mix into this until I get like a medium value of a lavender. So this violet pansy is making me a beautiful little light lavender, a medium value lavender, and that's what I'm going to use to paint the next circle inwards, the middle value circle. If you are painting along, you probably don't have time to chat and type in the chat, but I sure would love to know if any of you are painting along tonight. If you have a moment and can type it in, let us know, and then Caitlin will let me know. So now I've painted with this lavender color the second circle inside our large circle, which was the violet pansy. And now over here on this side, I'm just, and it doesn't matter which petal you start with, but like every other petal is going to be this color. So just go ahead and start in on a petal. Your center might still be a little wet, so just be careful as you're painting. I kind of use the chisel edge to go right up next to that center. And then I'm kind of pulling it down like parentheses, if you'll think about brush strokes that are like parentheses on either side of this. Every other one is this medium value lavender that we just brush mixed. If you were doing a lot more area, you needed to cover a lot more space, maybe you would take time to use a palette knife and mix up a nice good sized puddle of this color. But for tonight, what we're doing, it doesn't matter. We're just going to brush mix and keep going. And I'm going to put a little bit behind this one sunflower petal here, and then I'm done on this one. So I'm using that chisel edge to sneak up behind that yellow sunflower petal. Okay, so now what we have is the very center here and then every other petal here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this medium mix that we have here. I still have a little bit left on my palette, but this time I'm going to add a little bit more white to it. We want to use this same violet pansy and wicker white mix, but we're going to go even lighter and make a more even light lavender color. And I'm going to test now. I want to make it a little bit more lighter. Maybe a little bit more. You just want to make sure that there's enough contrast between the second color and then the most inner color between the two lavender colors. So I've got a little bit lighter color here that I'm going to add now to my center. Perfect. And now I'm going to use that same lightest lavender color now and paint every other petal over here. Okay. And again, over here, the next one, I'm kind of starting, like I said, the chisel edge is like right up next to the flower center. And then I'm kind of swooping out to create those petals. Caitlin, I see folks are responding. Do we have more people painting or watching?
Painting.
Oh, okay, good. I hope you're going to have fun with this with me tonight. All right, friends, I think my blue is almost done on my pot. When I say done, I meant dry. So I'm going to clean out my lavenders for now. And one thing I want us to do is to start working on our flower pot. And then what we're going to do is some of the black background. Then we'll start working details on our flowers. But I think, let me back up one more thing. I think we'll go ahead and get the flower center in first. So that was our blue that I'm sorry, our brown that we put out. And somebody asked if they could use burnt umber. They can. This is the bark brown that I am using tonight. I went ahead and made sure my number 12 flat brush was clean of the violet pansy that I last had in it. So now I'm just going to load up with the brown and I'm going to go ahead and paint my flower center. So our flower center is completely solid. This kind of real pretty, almost like a chocolate brown color. Looks like chocolates. That did not mean everyone needs to run to their pantry door and go find their Hershey Kisses. We said beautiful chocolate, and everyone's going to think, oh my gosh, I'm hungry for some chocolate. I'll go get a candy bar. I was talking with a friend earlier today, and I will not buy chocolates and keep them in the house because I don't have self-control. I will eat that candy. So if I have an urge for some chocolate, I will buy a bag of the baking chips, the little tiny chocolate chips that you use in cookies and things like that. And I will keep them in my refrigerator. And I tend to forget that they're there. But if I need a little bit of a chocolate fix, then I will go into the refrigerator every now and then and just go get a couple chocolate chips. And that will kind of soothe me. All right, my brown and my center is done. Now let's go ahead and start working on our blue pot, our flower pot. So I'm going to clean this brush, and for the flower pot, I'm going to go back to the largest brush, my 3/4 inch flat brush that I used to base coat the Look at Me blue in. And so we're going to work with Look at Me blue. We're going to work with some of our white, and then we have a dark shading color that we want to use too as well. And I'm going to get that out and put some on my palette right now. And that is our ink spot. So let's go ahead and get a little bit of ink spot out onto the palette. It's a dark navy blue-ish type color. So ink spot is the color that we want for our shading. I hope I'm not going too fast, but I know we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to just keep moving on. I'm going to load my brush with our Look at Me blue, the base color. And then what I'm going to do is do the shading first, then we'll do some highlighting. So I'm going Look at Me blue on both sides of my flat brush. Then I'm going to go directly up just a corner or half of the brush into that darker blue, the ink spot. So now I have a brush that has ink spot on one side to Look at Me blue on the other side. And when we look at our piece here, we have dark shading down here along the bottom. We have dark shading along the left side and on the body of the pot, just underneath the lip or the band. So let's go ahead and just short choppy strokes, pat some of that shading color onto our pot here. And again, I'm using my largest brush. That was my 3/4 inch flat brush. And I'm just patting that color along, kind of putting a little bit of that shading right underneath the lip or the band of the pot. I'm going to take that same brush loading as I feel like I need more paint, and I'm going to bring it down the left side of the pot towards the bottom. And then I'm going to bring it right up along the bottom. Again, short, choppy strokes. And because we put a little bit of that base color, the Look at Me blue in our brush, it's blending really beautifully right along with what we've already got base coated. And I'm going to work up to the chisel edge of the brush and bring it up the right-hand side just a little bit. So I brought some of that right on the edge, right up along there. With this same brush load, I'm going to now put some shading on the band portion right up along the top edge of the band. So we're going to start again, and you'll notice as I paint, I turn my work. So I want you to turn your work too. Keep it comfortable and smooth for you. And we're just using those same short choppy strokes as we go across the top of the flower pot. And this is our ink spot and our Look at Me blue right on the top edge of our flower pot. Okay. Now what I want to do is wipe out that dark color in the brush. So I'm just pinching it in the bristles here, pinching the bristles in my paper towel. And now what we want to do is we want to put a little bit of lightness to our pot. And that would be some white here along the bottom of the band and some white in the center of the pot. So I first want to load my brush with that Look at Me blue, again, the base color. And then I'm going to put just a little bit of the Wicker white, brushing one corner of the brush into the Wicker white. I'm also kind of blending it here on the palette to make sure that the white is not really stark and it's well blended into a light blue. And I'm going to take that light blue side of the brush and go along the edges here. I'll pick up a little bit more Look at Me blue. And I'm going to go along the bottom of our flower pot. So this is our white highlight here on the flower pot band. I'm going to get that nice and smooth there. And then what I want to do is, while I still have the white or the lightest blue now in my brush, I want to put a little bit of that in our flower pot center. So the side of the brush that has the white on it, I'm going to start here in the middle and just pat, pat, pat. And I want to bring some of that color into the center, and I keep flipping the brush around. I'm going to pick up just a little bit more. And I'm just kind of patting that white into the center and letting it kind of blend a little bit to where we have just a little bit of a halo here in the center of our pot. Not doing a lot, really, just kind of putting a little bit of lightness in the center of the pot. We want our pot to set right now, but before we let it completely set, if you look at my finished piece here, there's a pattern on the base of the pot, and that's done with my smaller flat brush. I picked up a little bit of white on the chisel edge. I touch down and then I pull and lift. Touch down, pull and lift. And it just creates just a little square edge of a little bit of a stroke. And I started across, if you look at it, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe rows. So up here at the top in this blue, darker blue section, and it might not be dry, but that's really okay. We want a scant amount of paint on that flat brush, but we want the chisel edge covered. And we're going to do 3 strokes across the top here. So I would start maybe in the center, maybe line yourself up with the flower stalk. You're going to touch down, pull, lift, touch down, pull, lift, touch down, pull, lift. The longer you pull, obviously the longer the stroke is going to be. The shorter you pull, the shorter the stroke will be. They don't have to be the same. They're just little short pulls. And I am doing mine in a pattern where I've got 3 across. The next row, I only have 2 across. Then you'll have another row where maybe you can have 3 across if they fit in the width of your pot. then 2 across. And you're just going to kind of keep adding this little pattern on your pot, however you like it. So some are long, some are short. They can all be the same. They can be a different pattern. You don't have to place them the same as I do. I just kind of evenly spaced mine out. And then I cleaned that brush. Let's scoot on real quick and do our leaves, and then we'll do some black. So the leaves right now, they are painted with our Thicket, and I'm going to go ahead and jump to the larger brush here, 3/4 inch flat brush. I'm going to load it with my base color, which again is my local color. I often call it too. It's my Thicket. And what I want to do is I want to shade the base of each of the leaves right at the top of the flower pot band. If you look at mine, you can see there's some brown on the bottom there. So I've got Thicket in my brush, which is our base color. I'm going to side load into our brown, which is our bark brown. And I'm just going to pat that color right along the base of the leaf across the top of the flower pot. Short, easy, simple. Same thing for this side. And the reason I went back to my, excuse me, my larger brush is because I can do the shading so much quicker with a bigger brush. So I've got shading now at the base of both of my leaves. And while I have the brown in my brush, I want to just shade the base of these flower stalks, flower stems. So just a little bit along the bottom of that and a little bit along the bottom of this one. You can also shade a little bit at the top of the flower stalks because the flowers are actually on top of our flower stalks. So again, that's the bark brown and the Thicket. And now I'm going to clean that brush. Okay, I am going to do a little bit of our black right now, not a lot, but I'm going to do a little bit of black to kind of get us covered here in some of the closest areas next to our flowers. So I'm going to put a little bit of black out onto my palette, and you can use pure black, you can use licorice. I have licorice here. And I'm going to use probably that number 12 flat brush. What I want to do primarily is get black around these flowers. You don't have to carry it all the way out to the outside edge right now, because you can come back and you can always paint more on the outside edge after you get the detailing done. But we want to do a little detailing on our flowers when the black is dry. And so let's get a little bit of black around this flower right here.
Questions.
Yes.
Judith says my brown flower center looks very light. Should she paint another coat?
If she's got a moment, yes, go ahead.
And another person would like to know how a black canvas would work with this.
Oh, I get that question all the time, and that's a very good question. A lot of times people wonder, why did I not start with a black canvas? Well, a black canvas, if you're repainting this again later, or maybe you haven't painted with me yet and you are going to paint yours tomorrow, you definitely can start with a black canvas. The reason I do not do that in class is because a black canvas is very dark, very opaque, and not all paint colors, especially yellows, are very opaque. Sometimes they're more translucent. And if you want to get a nice, look at my yellow ochre against the white. It's pretty solid. If I were to do that against my black, I would maybe need and require more steps or more coats of paint. So I typically don't go in this time frame. Also, this type of class where we only have a very limited time together, we don't have a lot of time to base coat, allow it to dry, or even use a heat tool to dry it and then come back and base it in again. So a lot of times it's easier to paint against a white background and then paint around it like we are right now than it is sometimes to paint over a dark one to try and get that nice opaque color. I hope that makes sense.
I think so.
It's a very, very good question. I do get asked that a lot. So my recommendation is if you have a black canvas and you want to paint yours on the black to start with so that you don't have to paint around it like I am now, by all means do so. You just may need to paint your colors a little bit more with maybe 2 layers of a base coat versus 1, just to get that nice opaque color. And I am right now just covering as fast and quickly as I can with my black. I'm just going around the petals, around the leaves, around each of the flowers as best I can. I'm not going to worry too much about my flower pot right now. Just get some of this background color of the black. Again, this is licorice and or pure black. I'm using licorice around each of our flowers and petals.
Jen has a question.
Yes.
She says, if I do a black canvas, can I paint the petals white and then layer on the yellow?
Yes, by all means you can. But there again, you're doing 2 layers at least. You know, the yellow ochre has a good hide versus maybe a lighter yellow. But yes, white would definitely help the colors pop a little bit. And I'm working with a canvas here that has a lot of texture to it. So I'm really having to work to get that black in all of the little nooks and crannies and weave of the canvas. So I want you to make sure that you're getting yours nicely covered as well. And I'm almost done around the flowers, and that's all I'm going to worry with right now. So you'll want to do the same thing. Thank you for those questions too. They've all been very good questions tonight. So Caitlin, keep them coming if you see them.
Will do.
Okay. Now if you were doing this at home, you might even take the time to go ahead and do the entire background all black. And then you might come back with your hair dryer or your heat tool to dry everything and set it in place. But we're not going to worry about painting all of it right now because your black is black and it will match what you've already painted. And you can come back in and get those areas later. So let's go ahead. I think my blue band is dry enough. We can add a little bit of a white stripe onto our blue band, and then we'll start working on our flowers. I got a little bit of black paint on my hand. Let me get a baby white here. Okay, what I'm going to do next is we're going to take our liner brush and we are going to get a little bit of water in it. I'm going to use, yeah, this liner brush is perfect. I'm going to put a little bit of water in my liner brush and I'm going to carry it over here to where the puddle of white is and bring some white out to just thin that down a little bit. And what I did on the band here is I just made little white stripes. You can see that very easily. What I did was I started in the center and then I did one on each of the 2 outside edges and then kind of filled in. That kind of helps you with your spacing. And the reason I'm using water is because I want to thin that paint down so that it will flow really nice on that brush for me. And you can do a stroke vertically, like pulling towards you. If it's easier for you to pull on a side view like this, I want you to find your comfort level and just touch down, use very little pressure and pull a stroke. And if you find that it's skipping a little bit, maybe it's that you didn't put enough moisture in your paint, so thin it out with a little bit more water. If it's not flowing at all, that means you don't have enough water in it at all. So just go ahead and find that happy medium between the paint as it comes from the bottle, the rich and creamy consistency that it is, to where it is when you make it a little bit thinner so that it will flow for you. So we're just going to add a few more stripes now, just kind of filling in. And this is a good way to kind of check your spacing when you're doing something. Start in the middle, do the 2 side pieces, and then kind of fill in. So there are usually little stripes now on the top of the flower pot. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a lighter value green out, and that is this beautiful kind of a lime. It's called lime green, but it's a limey yellowy green color. I'm gonna put that out here by my dark green, my Thicket. And I'm going to use my number 12 flat brush, and I'm going to put a little bit of lime green now in my leaves, because the leaves kind of look dull and dead right now. We need to brighten them up and put some lime green on our leaves, more at the top of the points of the leaf and along the edges here. So I'm going to put a little bit of the Thicket in my number 12 flat brush, side load into my lime green, and I'm blending on the palette with that lime green side of the paint towards the tip of the leaf. I'm just going to pat that color on, just brightening up that leaf color a little bit. Again, this is lime green with a little bit of Thicket in my brush, and I'm just patting that color on. And now you can see the tip of the leaf, right? So we're going to load our brush up again with some of that lime green and the Thicket, and we're going to work on the second leaf, lightening up this edge here that's closest to maybe the top of the leaf, closest towards our sunflower. And I'm using my short choppy strokes to kind of blend that in. All right. And now while I have this brush loaded with the lime green and the Thicket, I'm going to use it up on its chisel edge. So just this flat part of the brush is going to be touching my surface. I want you all to look closely at the sunflower stalk, and we're just going to go up and down like a seesaw. I'm going to do it sideways so that you can see mine. I'm just going to take that and I'm just going to up and down with that lime green on just a corner of the brush. And we're just putting a little bit of texture in that stalk of the sunflower. And we can do a little bit of that on the little wildflower here, but not too much. Okay. Now I'm going to let that brush go to the water. I'm going to pick up my liner brush one more time. I'm now going to go back into the lime green, thin that down a little bit, and we have one line in the center of our leaf, and that is starting at the base of the leaf, and it's stroking up towards the tip, and that's going to make our center vein. So let's do that with our liner brush, thinned lime green. I'm starting here in the middle of the leaf, at the base of the leaf where it touches the flower pot. And I'm just pulling up a line through the center of the leaf on both leaves. Okay. All right. Next, let's go ahead and move on to let's see, what should we do first? Let's move on to our sunflower. That's the star of the show. So right now we have our yellow ochre leaves and we have our brown center, and mine are dry. My black is almost completely dry next to it. So what I want to do now is I think I'll take my largest 3/4 inch flat brush. I want to side load into our petal color, which is our yellow ochre. So I've got yellow ochre just on one half of this large flat brush. The other half, I'm going to do our brown, which was our bark brown. So I'm going to have a brush that's going to have yellow ochre and bark brown on the brush. I'm blending on the palette to make sure those two colors blend well before I actually go to my surface here. What I want to do is, and our sunflower is going to have lots of little polka dots in the center, but I want this to kind of blend these two areas together. So I'm going to put the yellow ochre on the side of the brush onto the yellow ochre petal, the brown onto the brown, and I'm just patting that color on so that I kind of blur that line. I'm blurring that line. Can you see these two here are a little bit more softer and blurred versus any of the other ones? So that's what we're doing on all of our petals. We're keeping the yellow ochre on the base of the petal, the brown basically on the brown center, but they're smudging a little bit, if that makes sense to you. We're just softening that edge. I got a little bit into my black. It wasn't completely dry right here. Let me take that off. There. And I'm going to continue on, smudging that brown into the yellow ochre of the petals. It's just really a short choppy strokes, maybe 3 or 4 strokes on each petal. That's all you need to do. Okay. Now what I want to do is clean that brush, and I'm going to set that aside, and we're going to go back to our number 12 flat brush. And what I want to do with this is I'm going to bring out one more color, and that is our brighter yellow color. I'm going to put a little bit out onto the palette next to my yellow ochre. This color is our moon yellow. And I'm going to take a clean number 12 flat brush. Let me get this clean. There we go. And what I want to do is load this brush really nice and well with our base color of the petals, which is our yellow ochre. I'm going to side load into this bright yellow that we just added, the moon yellow. And the moon yellow is what's going to be out towards the tip of each of our petals. And I can do some of my petals that are just moon yellow out on the tip. This one is one I just did. Or I can even pick up a little bit of white and bring some white over here. So I can pick up our yellow ochre, our moon yellow, and on the moon yellow side, also pick up a little bit of the white, and that will lighten it even more. So you can see now that that lightened it even a little bit more. So what I want to do is just pat that color on the very outside edges of each of those flowers, petals of our sunflower. This is probably one of the most simple ways to paint a sunflower. Not a tremendous amount of detail. I'm coming up right up along those edges. A little bit of white kind of helps blend in some of that brightness that we want. The moon yellow and the white really kind of lightens those edges. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to darken my center a little bit. So I'm going to clean that lightness out of the brush. And I'm going to load my brush with our base of our center, which our brown is the bark brown. And side load just a tiny, tiny corner of it into our licorice. So the brush is mostly brown with just a little bit of black on the edge. And the black is what I'm going to bring onto the center at the base of the center. So when we think of the face of the clock, I'll be patting from like maybe 7 o'clock all the way around to 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. So I'm keeping the black towards the outside bottom, or the inside bottom of our center here. And I'm just patting that, kind of bouncing the canvas up and down, keeping our black to the base of the flower center and only on the bottom of the flower center. We're going to clean that. And now let's talk about the detailing on our flowers here, as well as the center flower, our sunflowers. So we're going to do a lot more with our liner brush now. So get your liner brushes out and ready. And what we're going to do is let's first do the center of this left side wildflower. This is all done with our white. And if you haven't painted yours with me tonight, and maybe you're painting and you're just watching the replay to paint along, when you do the white line work at the top of your pot here, maybe you do this step at the same time, but you're going to start right here in the center of our little cog wheel here, like of our center flower, and you're just going to do a swirly design all the way around, making it larger and larger and larger until you reach the outside edge. So start in the center. I'm holding my brush straight up and down to the surface. Only the tip of my liner brush is touching, and I'm just going to keep painting that swirl. This is the Wicker white. I have used my brush to fill it good and full of the thinned white paint. And I'm just going to keep making that little swirly design till I reach the outside edge. If you need to stop and reload, just retrace your steps a little bit like I just did. And I'm almost done with this part. Just kind of keep swirling. If you didn't get it in the center, then you might have a few swirls extra on one direction or another, and that's really kind of all right. Doesn't have to be completely centered. We're just putting a pattern inside that flower center. We're going to put patterns on our leaves and also on the petals here. This is all going to be done with our black. So let's take a little bit of water over to our black. Again, mine is Licorice. You could be using pure black. I'm thinning down a puddle of our black because we're now going to do a lot of line work with our black. This flower here on the right-hand side, all we need to do is just line the outline of each of those circles. The inside circle, the second circle. Okay, so we're just going to take, again, hold your brush straight up and down and just start at one point, make a full circle all the way around. Stop and reload your brush, make another line all the way around. Practice makes perfect, no need to rush. That is so true. I know I'm teaching fast, but we have a lot to cover, so I'm just going to keep moving. On the wildflower on my left-hand side, we're going to take that same liner brush with Licorice, and we are going to do loop-de-loops, kind of like we're already going to go around each of these petals, these little flower petals. Some of it, because you've already painted black around the outside edge, it may not show. But we're basically, can you see how we're separating our flower petals now? Just putting a little bit of a black seam, if you will, between them. And if you didn't get a nice smooth petal edge, this is where the black can help you kind of straighten up your petals. This is just good practice with the liner brush and a lot of line work. So it's nothing is hard. It just takes a little time and practice to kind of get used to working with a liner brush. So I have outlined each of these petals on this side. The petals that we used in the darker of the two lavender color combinations are going to be diagonal lined. So every other petal has a diagonal black line in it. So just simply pick a direction. And I'm going to start maybe on this one over here. And I'm just going to draw diagonal lines through that petal. Then I'll turn my design and I'm going to do my diagonal lines in the same direction. Just letting the tip of my liner brush touch my surface.
And could they use Juneberry or Perfect Purple?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Juneberry is such a beautiful color. That's a relatively newer color. Yes, that would be very, very pretty. I went with the purples because when you think about a color wheel, here's a color lesson for you. It's the opposite side of the color wheel. So it's a good color that offers contrast to the yellow of our sunflower. But yes, a Juneberry would be very, very pretty, and Perfect Purple would also be nice. Okay, the line work on this flower is done. The line work on this flower is done. Now we have just a little bit of line work. If you still want to continue doing line work, on a few of the petals here, I just started here at the base of the petal or where the center meets the petal. And I came out and I did a little curlicue. So I just came out into the petal and did a little swoop. So I didn't do it on every single petal, but I did it on a few of them here and there. So I started here and I'm going to show you on mine. Started here in the center using the tip of the flower, or I'm sorry, the tip of my edge of my liner brush. And I'm just doing a little bit of a swirl. And so I'm going to do that on maybe every other one, but I think there's one that has two in between because of the way the petal count ended up. So if you want to add some swirls inside your petals, my petals are dry. If yours are not, I would definitely wait for them to dry first before you do this little swirl. And you can look at if you printed out the pattern or if you look at the color photograph, this will tell you the direction of the swirls. I kind of changed mine up a little bit. I did not do the swirl in the same direction on every single petal. All right, that is it for the liner brush, my friends. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start putting like some design work of dots. So I'm going to add a couple more colors to my palette, and one is Aqua. This is a good, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, is there a
No.
problem with using acrylic pens to do the swirl?
No, not at all. I would just make sure that if you plan to put any kind of finish on your piece, if you're using a paint pen or a permanent marker, just make sure that it is permanent and that it won't bleed for you later on if you're going to brush varnish on or spray finish a varnish on. So just make sure it's a permanent pen or marker. I've got Aqua that I just added to my palette, and I'm going to start doing a little bit of frosting. And when I say frosting, I'm going to have a little bit of Aqua here on my pot. There's a little Aqua on each of my leaves. I threw a little Aqua on the bottom portion of this flower here. And there's some Aqua in some of the petals and the bottom of the center here. So it's just a matter of using a nice clean brush. It is wet. I side loaded in our Aqua. So there's Aqua just on a corner of the brush, blending on the palette here. I have no paint on the other half of the brush. So I've got Aqua just on one corner of the flat brush. And I'm just going to take those areas. Let me bring this back into view. And I'm just going to put a little bit of frosting, if you will. I'm just putting the jewelry. The last thing you do when you accessorize is to put the jewelry on. So this is our jewelry stage tonight. We're just putting a little bit of extra color. And this is what really kind of makes our design kind of pop a little bit. Make sure my black is dry here on my petals. And it's just a matter of allowing that to just kind of fall right out onto the piece and just kind of pat it in place. I'm going to put some on my flower pot here as we're looking at it, the right side of my flower pot. A little bit going up the side here. So I now have added some on my blue flower pot, on both of my leaves and both of the wildflowers. And the last part that we're going to do is we're going to really jazz up our star of the show, which is our centerpiece here of our sunflower. And we're going to add all kinds of polka dots here around the center of the flower. And so if you look at it closely, I'm holding mine up right now. We have dots all the way around the center that are the yellow ochre, our base color. We have across the top just moon yellow. On the bottom, we have just primarily our perfect purple. And at the top, we have the lighter lavender mixture up here. And then we have a little bit of accent of our aqua that we did. So I'm going to bring it up one more time so you can see. The dots are plentiful. They're all different sizes and shapes. They can be painted on using the liner brush tip. You can use the brush handle of a paintbrush. You could also go to use a dotting tool like a stylist. But when you put your dots on, and I'll start here making some brown dots, maybe first, just to kind of get started. My dots, I touch and I keep moving. And I allow some of the dots to be the same size and shape, and some are not. The more you continue dotting with a tool load or a brush handle load, the smaller the dots get. But as I bring mine up, can you see that the dots are not all the same size? They're not all going in the same direction, and some are spilling out onto the petals of our sunflower itself. So I'm inside the flower center, I'm outside the flower center onto the petals. I'm just constantly adding more paint to my dotting tool. And I am just moving along the circle rather quickly, really. I'm not laboring over this. The dots are very dimensional on my piece. And there's just a layer of brown all the way around. Now I'll go ahead and I'll wipe the brown out of my dotting tool, and maybe now I'll go to the next color, which is my yellow ochre. And I'm going to put yellow ochre here and there. And again, they fall in the center, they fall outside. I'm constantly adding more paint so that I have some thick ones, some little ones. And you can see it's just a rather rapid motion of going around the flower center. Once you do a full circle of the brown and a full circle of the yellow ochre, now you can kind of separate the top of the flower from the bottom of the flower. So on the top half, let's add some of just our moon yellow on. And do allow a little bit to fall over into the bottom half, just on the edges, so that it's a smooth, gradual change between the colors that you're dotting with. You don't want it to be a complete like slice, if you will. So there is my yellow, mostly on the top half. Now on the bottom half, I'm going to do mostly my purple, which again was our base color for our wildflowers. And it is a complementary color of our yellows. And if you have perfect purple, if you have violet pansy, somebody was talking about Juneberry, you can switch it up and do a couple different colors. But this just kind of ties in our wildflowers to the dots. And now what we want to do is I do want to quickly make up a brush mix again of this white and purple, our wicker white and our violet pansy. I want to make a nice lavender color. Just making a quick brush mix, that's all I'm doing. Because I want to take some of that light color to the top of, so just so we have some purple at the top of our dots here in our flower center. And a little bit more. And then the last set of dots that I'm going to add will be our aqua ones. And when you look at here, you can see that there, if you think of a face of clock, they're probably maybe from like 3 o'clock to a little bit past 6 o'clock, just along this one little side here, like the lower right corner, if you will, if there's ever corners on circles. And again, be wild with these dots. Some are in the center on the flower center and some fall out onto the petals. Somebody wants me to hold it up. There we go. Now, the one reason why I had you put a little bit of black around here is because this wildflower here on the right has a few petals that come out onto the black and they stroke in towards the center. So we're going to take our smallest little flat brush. Which one do I have here? It's probably the one I was using to brush mix. Let me get this nice and clean and dry. And what we're going to do is we're going to load this with our lavender that we just mixed. I just want to get some nice paint on both sides of the flat brush, stroking into this puddle of paint that we just mixed up. And the same thing that we did here on our pot where we touched down, pulled and lift, just like an airplane takeoff real fast. We kind of did that. That's what we're going to do here against the black of the background. So we're going to start here on the outside edge and just do a touchdown, pull, lift real quick. And don't go into the flower center of our purple here, the deepest purple that we had. We're just going to touch down, pull, and lift up real quick. So I'm going to, again, fill my brush with paint. And I'm just going to touch down, pull, lift. Oh, that wasn't far enough. Let me show you what I just did. That wasn't far enough. I want to come down to the center, to the outside edge of that flower. There we go. And can you see I have like a little bit of a wispy edge? That's okay. That's really what I want. And that's what I have on the other one. And if it helps, split your flower up so that maybe that was 12 o'clock, do one at 6 o'clock. Okay, then maybe do it, split it again and do like 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. That will help you with your spacing if there's room to do a 9 o'clock one here. And then you can do a stroke in between those, or maybe 2 strokes in between those. Just do your best to kind of add as many little strokes as you want around the outside edge. And a lot of that will depend upon the size of the flat brush you're using. If you're using a 6, you might not get as many around. If you drop down to like maybe a 4, you might get more strokes or more petals all the way around. But this just kind of helps, this technique here kind of helps you do some even spacing. It's a touchdown, pull, lift. And that's all there is to this little flower, and it's done as well. I'm gonna come back here. And of course, then the last thing we want to do is just come back around with your 3/4 inch flat brush and pick up all of your black and then just fill in the rest of your design, because that is the end of the wildflowers and the sunflowers. So you just want to then come back and do all of the black all the way around. And again, make sure that you are covering in the full little design of the weave of the canvas. Use that chisel edge of your brush to the best of your ability to get nice, smooth, straight lines. Use the flat of the brush to cover large space areas. And when you're all said and done, I signed my name on mine going up the side of the pot on the right side of the pot. I also on mine finished mine out by going on the outside edges of the canvas, the border or the sides of the canvas. I painted them all solid black as well. Any technique questions before we kind of finish up tonight's class?
Nope.
Okay. I'm just going to quickly throw the black background on mine, and then we will. So if anyone has any questions, now's a good time to ask them. And this class has been recorded, so know that you can find it here on the YouTube app. You'll go to the Michael's channel, and they have a section for online classes. You should find it right there on their online classes, and they're usually posted within 24 hours. So give it a little time through the course of the day tomorrow, and you should be able to find tonight's class. And I thank you all, every one of you, for attending the class tonight, whether you painted along with me or you just watched and want to paint later. Remember, too, that here at Plaid, we have a fabulous Learn to Paint group called the Let's Paint with Plaid Facebook group. We are on there all the time teaching classes. So feel free, and we're teaching you product knowledge and showing trends. We talk about new product releases. We talk about how to use products. Today, we painted a beautiful pumpkin using some metallic colors. So it's really a lot of fun. I welcome each of you to join our group and come paint along with us. That is Let's Paint with Plaid. And if you have painted along, or I should say, when you complete your painting, be sure and snap a picture of it and post it in the group. Use the hashtag Let's Paint Challenge, or you can tag Michael's classes. And we all want to be cheerleaders for you and want to see what you do. And so be sure and post a picture of your finished piece. I think we probably can go straight on now unless there's any other questions, Caitlin.
Nope.
Okay. I want to preview what our next Michael's class is going to be in 2 weeks, again on a Tuesday night, 6:30 Central Time, 7:30 Eastern Time, which is my time zone. Andy Jones will be here sitting in this chair, and he is going to share with you a fabulous little pumpkin, again on a black background, but he's going to start out with a black canvas. This is all painted in a metallic sheen. Can you all see the sheen? This is a project called Pumpkin. It's already listed in the Michael's community class section. So go there and you can register for this class and come paint along with Andy. He's going to be using a palette knife. I think you can tell that from looking at this piece. Those of you that love palette knife painting, you'll want to come along and join Andy for that class. But until then, I want to thank you all for joining me tonight for Be a Sunflower. I hope you all had a good time, learned a lot maybe, or learned even a little bit something new tonight. I can't wait to see what you have painted, and be sure and join our Let's Paint with Plaid group. So until next time, thank you. I'm Chris Williams. I appreciate you all being with me tonight. Good night.